The advertisement promised a short-term caregiving position with hardship pay, and in the brutal Kentucky February of 2018, I was desperate enough to believe it. My name is Sarah, and back then I was a 24-year-old nursing assistant drowning in student loan debt and living in a studio apartment that my meager hospital paycheck barely covered. When the email from Halcyon Days Senior Care hit my inbox, the $50 an hour rate felt like a divine intervention. I pictured a cozy, if rustic, family-style home, maybe an older couple needing extra help through a rough winter. The reality, when my beat-up Corolla finally crawled up the mile-long, unplowed driveway that first Monday, was a 3-story Victorian mansion that looked less like a home and more like a skeleton picked clean by the wind. The paint was blistered gray, several upstairs windows were boarded shut, and the only sign of life was a single flickering porch light fighting the 4 p.m. dusk. Mr. Donovan, the administrator, met me at the door. He was a man built like a refrigerator, with a handshake that felt like cold, damp meat and eyes that never quite settled on mine. He smelled of antiseptic and something sweetly rotten like overripe fruit. "We operate on a tight, private budget," he said, his voice a low rumble as he led me through a foyer that reeked of mildew and stale cabbage. The promised heating issues were an understatement. My breath fogged the air inside, and I kept my winter coat tightly buttoned. Our residents are non-ambulatory and largely non-verbal. Advanced dementia. Your job is simple. Feed them, change them, chart their vitals. Don't bother trying to converse. He handed me a master key on a heavy brass ring. It felt unnaturally cold, like it had been stored in ice. The first chill that wasn't from the weather went down my spine. My first shift was a silent, eerie ballet of shadows. The residents were in what Donovan called the quiet ward on the second floor. There were 8 of them, each in a stark room containing only a narrow bed and a bedside table. They were all shockingly thin, their skin like parchment paper stretched over bird-like bones. And their eyes? Their eyes were vacant, but not with the soft confusion of dementia. This was a hollow, chemical stillness. They would obediently open their mouths for the bland, pureed food I offered, but they never made a sound, never blinked at the cold. When I took their pulses, they were slow and thready. I found no personal effects, no photos, no cards, not even names on the doors. Just room numbers. The only consistent sound was the frantic knocking of the old steam radiators, fighting a losing battle against the cold that seeped in from the walls. The horror clicked into place on my 3rd day, during the 2 a.m. meds round. Donovan had left a printed chart for a new admission, a John Doe in room 3. But when I entered room 3, the same man from yesterday, who I'd logged as resident 7, was lying there. They were recycling identities. My hands trembled as I fumbled through the med cart. The drugs weren't for managing behavior or pain. They were heavy sedatives and paralytics. In a locked drawer, I found bundles of pre-signed blank Medicare claim forms. The pieces assembled into a monstrous picture. They were keeping these poor souls in a chemically induced twilight, billing for treatments never given, and reusing their identities to milk the system dry. They weren't patients, they were ghostly breathing invoices. I knew I had to get out right then and call the police. But as I turned to leave, the door swung open. Donovan filled the frame, his expression no longer one of bland authority, but of cold, calculated fury. He
he'd been watching on the hidden camera I'd just noticed in the smoke detector. He didn't say a word. He just moved with a terrifying, practiced speed. One meaty hand clamped over my mouth, crushing my scream against my teeth, while his other arm locked around my waist, lifting me clear off the ground. I kicked and thrashed, my shoes connecting uselessly with his legs, but he carried me like a sack of grain down the back staircase I'd never seen before. The air grew colder with each step, smelling of wet earth and something metallic. At the bottom, he flung me forward. I stumbled on the uneven stone floor, my knees scraping hard, and heard the heavy clang of an iron door, followed by the definitive snick of a deadbolt. The absolute, light-swallowing blackness that
followed was more disorienting than any blow. For a minute, there was only the sound of my own ragged, sobbing breaths and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Then, as my eyes strained, shapes began to form in the profound dark. Faint, gray light seeped from a single, grime-crusted window well near the ceiling, revealing a low, stone-walled cellar. And I wasn't alone. Against the walls, on stained mattresses, or just on the floor, were forms. Human forms. 5, maybe 6 of them. They were so still, I thought they were corpses. But then I saw the faint, laborious clouds of breath rising from a few. They were wrapped in thin, institutional blankets, their limbs stiff, their faces waxy and pale in the gloom. These were the ones who knew too much, the failed experiments Donovan couldn't bill for anymore. He hadn't killed them, he'd just turned this tomb into their final, frozen ward. The cold was an aggressive, living thing. It didn't just surround me, it stabbed through my scrubs and invaded my bones. My teeth started chattering so violently I thought they'd shatter. I crawled towards the nearest shape, an elderly woman with a cloud of white hair matted against her forehead. I touched her wrist to check for a pulse, and her skin was so cold it felt sticky, like touching the inside of a freezer. Her eyelids fluttered open. 2 watery blue eyes focused on me with a clarity that was jarring. "You're the new girl," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "He puts the loud ones down here. The cold, it just helps you stop fighting." Her name was Mabel, and before the drugs and the cold had hollowed her out, she'd been a retired bookkeeper. In halting whispers, as we huddled together for pathetic warmth, she confirmed it all. They'd move us around, change our names. One day, you're Eleanor Smith getting a phantom surgery. The next, you're Beverly Jones getting dialysis. She pointed a trembling finger towards a corner. A man lay there, utterly still, no breath visible. Frank figured it out, threatened to call his son. He's been down here 4 days. The cold, it just makes you sleep and not wake up. She clutched my arm, her brittle nails digging in. He won't risk you getting out. You'll become a ghost like us, and then a new name on a form. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. It would burn the last of my warmth. I forced myself to think, my mind feeling as slow and thick as the freezing air. The window well. It was the only source of light, a rectangle of grimy glass set in a rusty metal frame about 7 feet up the wall. If I could break it, maybe I could scream loud enough for someone on the deserted grounds to hear. I stood on wobbly legs, my joints protesting, and started scanning the cellar for anything to stand on. My eyes landed on the old wooden chair Mabel had mentioned. It was missing a leg,
but it was the only thing in the room that wasn't a mattress or a dying person. Dragging the chair across the stone floor sent a screech echoing through the cellar that made me freeze, listening for footsteps above. Nothing. Positioning it under the window was a battle. The uneven leg made it rock wildly. I had to steady it with one hand and use the rough stone wall for balance as I climbed onto the seat. The chair groaned under my weight. Up close, the window was worse than I thought, caked with decades of dirt and reinforced with a heavy gauge wire mesh on the inside. I couldn't push it open. I'd need to break both the glass and the mesh, and I had nothing to break it with but my own frozen fists. Desperation makes you brutal. I stepped off the chair, my breath coming in ragged white puffs, and wrenched at the broken chair leg until it splintered free. It was a heavy, solid piece of oak. Climbing back up, I ignored the protest in my muscles and the way the chair wobbled. I said a silent apology to Mabel and the others, then swung the leg like a bat against the wire mesh. The impact sent a jarring shock up my arms, but the mesh only dented. The glass behind it cracked into a spider web. I swung again and again, each blow a thunderclap in the silent cellar. On the fourth swing, the glass shattered inward, showering my hair with icy shards. But the mesh held, bowed inward, but still firmly rooted in the frame. The blast of outside air that poured through the broken pane was so cold it felt like fire on my face, but it was fresh. It smelled of pine and frozen earth, not death and decay. I could
see the faint gray light of a cloudy night sky. I started clawing at the edges of the mesh, my numb fingers tearing on the sharp metal, trying to find a bolt or a weak spot. That's when I heard it. The distinct crunch of heavy footsteps on the frozen gravel outside, moving fast, circling toward the sound of breaking glass. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the window well. Donovan was coming. I had seconds. My eyes, wild with terror, scanned the cellar floor and landed on Frank's still form. A horrible, necessary idea formed in my mind. There was no time for decency, only survival. I scrambled down from the chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, and rushed to Frank's body. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," I chanted under my breath as I grabbed him under his icy armpits. He was terrifyingly light. With a grunt of effort that tore from my throat, I hauled his torso up and propped him against the wall directly beneath the shattered window. In the near darkness, he was just a tall, dark shape. As the flashlight beam stabbed through the window again, I ducked behind the old furnace, pressing myself into its rusty, frigid side. The beam lingered on Frank's silhouette. I heard Donovan's muffled curse from outside. The key turned in the deadbolt. The iron door screeched open, and Donovan's massive form blocked the doorway, a silhouette backlit by the dim hall light. He took 2 steps in, his flashlight fixed on Frank's propped-up body. "Clever girl," he growled, stepping toward it. This was my only chance. I launched from behind the furnace, the broken chair leg raised high in both hands. He started to turn, but he was too slow. I brought the leg down with every ounce of fear and rage in my body, not on his head, but on the back of his knee. There was a sickening pop, and he roared, collapsing onto his good knee. I didn't wait. I was already moving, a scream finally ripping from my lungs as I sidestepped his grasping hands and bolted out the open cellar door. I didn't stop running until my lungs were searing and the lights of a distant highway gas station glittered like salvation through the trees.
I banged on the door of the closed truck stop diner until a night cook, wide-eyed, let me in and called 911. The police found the Halcyon Days house empty, scrubbed clean of any paperwork. Donovan was gone. But they found the basement. They found Mabel, still alive but barely, and the others. Frank. The investigation that followed was a whirlwind of Medicaid fraud charges and news stories, but Donovan was never caught. The physical cold left my bones after a few hours in a hospital blanket. The other cold, the one that settled in my soul when I remember Mabel's whisper or the chemical stillness of those rooms, that one never left. I moved states, changed my number, but some nights, when the winter wind rattles my windows, I still wake up feeling the sticky, frozen cold of that cellar floor. And I know that real monsters don't need fangs or claws, just a spreadsheet, a set of keys, and a heart as cold as a Kentucky February. Story 2. My own scream was the first thing I heard when I surfaced from the freezing black water. The second was the hysterical shrieking of a tourist clinging to the hull of my capsized canoe, the December current of the New River Gorge dragging us both toward the next set of rapids. My name is Casey, and in the winter of 2022, I was a 28-year-old licensed rafting guide working part-time at the only reputable outfitter in Fayetteville, West Virginia that dared run limited winter trips. I was doing a solo safety patrol that morning, checking ice buildup on the rocks, when I saw the unthinkable. A flotilla of bright yellow, cheap recreational canoes, the kind you rent at a summer lake, paddling straight into the Devil's Jaw section, their occupants wearing nothing but life jackets over puffy ski jackets. The water temperature was just above freezing. Hypothermia would set in within minutes. I reacted on pure instinct, maneuvering my professional whitewater canoe into the tail of their group, yelling at them to turn back. I managed to get alongside the last canoe, a middle-aged couple whose faces were masks of pure terror, just as their boat clipped a shelf of river ice and flipped. I went in after them. Now, gasping for air in the river's brutal grip, I shoved the woman toward my overturned boat and screamed at her husband to grab the rescue rope I'd managed to snag. Every breath felt
like inhaling shattered glass. As I fought to get us to shore, I looked upriver and saw him standing on the overlooked cliff. Harlan. He was just watching, arms crossed, a dark silhouette against the steel-gray sky. Harlan, Huck Finnick, yes, the irony was sickening, was a local nuisance everyone knew but couldn't pin down. An unlicensed, bare-bones operator who preyed on reckless college kids and budget tourists with online ads promising extreme winter rapids adventures for half my company's price. He used stolen, decaying equipment and had no safety briefing, just a waiver so flimsy it wouldn't hold up in any court. I'd reported him 3 times to the Park Service and the state, but he was a ghost, moving his launch point every weekend. Seeing him now, calmly watching the chaos his greed had caused, a new kind of cold settled in my gut, colder than the river. After I got the couple to shore and called for an ambulance, my rage was a living thing. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, dripping wet and shaking, not just from the cold. I gave a formal statement, showed them the photos I'd snapped on my waterproof camera of his makeshift launch site and his rotting canoes. "We'll look into it, Casey," the deputy said, but his tone was tired. Harlan had relatives everywhere. He was a slippery local problem. I thought that was it. I was wrong. As I left, I didn't notice the mud-crusted truck parked down the street, its driver watching my every move. 2 days later, I had my own winter tour scheduled, a mild, scenic run for a group of 6 university botanists studying frost-resistant riparian plants. It was supposed to be safe, educational. I went to the outfitter's storage shed the night before to check my gear under the single flickering fluorescent light. The moment I opened my Pelican case, I knew. My satellite phone's antenna was snapped clean off. The charging port on my emergency beacon was packed with river silt and superglue. My personal dry bag, which held my extra layers, fire starting kit, and protein bars, had been slashed from end to end. The contents soaked in what smelled like rancid motor oil. Sabotage. Professional, malicious, and thorough. My boss told me to cancel. But the botanists had driven 8 hours, the trip was fully paid, and a stubborn, furious part of me refused to let Harlan win. I know this river blindfolded, I insisted. It's a Class 1 stretch, we'll be fine. I cobbled together backup gear, using an old bulky company radio and stuffing my pockets with chemical hand warmers. As I loaded the canoes onto the trailer at dawn, the sky was a sickly yellow purple, a color that screamed coming snow. The forecast had called for flurries in the evening, but the wind had a new, serrated edge to it. The first seed of real cold dread planted itself in my chest. The first hour on the water was deceptively peaceful. The botanists were thrilled, pointing out evergreen mosses on the banks, their laughter ringing in the crisp air. But the sky deepened from yellow to a bruised gray, and the promised flurries began, not gently, but in hard, horizontal pellets that stung any exposed skin. The wind picked up, howling through the gorge and churning the river into a choppy, malevolent version of itself. My easy Class 1 stretch suddenly had white caps. The smiles vanished from my clients' faces, replaced by concentrated fear as they fought to keep their canoes straight in the mounting current. The decision point was a channel that split around a large rocky island known as Willow Bar. The main channel was faster but riskier with the wind. The narrower back channel, which I'd planned to take, was usually calmer. As we approached, I saw the entire side channel was clogged, not with ice, but with a massive, fresh-looking tangle of deadfall and debris, a sweeper, log-jammed from bank to bank, impossible to pass. It hadn't been there 3 days prior. Someone had engineered it. My blood ran colder than the river. We had to take the main channel. I keyed the company radio. "This is Casey. We're taking the main at Willow Bar. Conditions deteriorating." Only static screamed back. The sabotage had been more comprehensive than I'd known. 2 days later, I had my own winter tour scheduled. A mild, scenic run for a group of 6 university botanists studying frost-resistant riparian plants. It was supposed to be safe, educational. I went to the outfitter's storage shed the night before to check my gear under the single flickering fluorescent light. The moment I opened my Pelican case, I knew. My satellite phone's antenna was snapped clean off. The charging port on my emergency beacon was packed with river silt and superglue. My personal dry bag, which held my extra layers, fire starting kit, and protein bars, had been slashed from end to end. The contents smelled like rancid motor oil. Sabotage. Professional, malicious, and thorough. My boss told me to cancel, but the botanists had driven 8 hours. The trip was fully paid, and a stubborn, furious part of me refused to let Harlan win. "I know this river blindfolded," I insisted. "It's a Class 1 stretch. We'll be fine." I cobbled together backup gear, using an old, bulky company radio and stuffing my pockets with chemical hand warmers. As I loaded the canoes onto the trailer at dawn, the sky was a sickly yellow purple, a color that screamed coming snow. The forecast had called for flurries in the evening, but the wind had a new, serrated edge to it. The first seed of real cold dread planted itself in my chest. The main channel was a funnel for the wind. It hit us like a physical wall, stealing our breath and whipping the snow into a blinding horizontal curtain. We were being pushed sideways toward the rapids. I screamed commands until my throat was raw, directing the 3 canoes toward the only refuge, Willow Bar Island itself. We fought for every inch, paddles digging into water that was now thick with chunks of slurry ice. My hands, even in gloves, went from burning to numb. We crashed onto the island's gravel bank, not as guides and tourists, but as refugees, scrambling to drag the canoes out of the river's clawing reach. The world vanished behind the whiteout. The far shore, only 100 yards away, was gone. We were trapped on a slab of rock and frozen earth, the river roaring on both sides. The temperature was plummeting. I gathered the group in the lee of a large boulder, my mind racing through our supplies. The slashed dry bag meant no real shelter, no way to start a fire with the soaked kit. We had the chemical warmers, a single space blanket in my guide kit, and the waterlogged protein bars. The botanists, a mix of PhDs and grad students, looked to me, their earlier academic curiosity replaced by the primal fear of exposure. I tried the radio again. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Casey. We are stranded on Willow Bar." The static that answered was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Time became the slow, cruel drip of freezing water. We huddled together, sharing body heat and the pathetic, dying warmth of the chemical packets. The snow accumulated, burying our canoes under white mounds, sealing our fate. One of the grad students, a young woman named Chloe, started slurring her words, a deadly sign of hypothermia setting in. We wrapped her in the space blanket and sandwiched her between us. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than the rocks around us. I had led them here. My stubbornness had played right into Harlan's hands. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a sentence. Just as despair was about to cement us in place, I saw it. A flicker of orange through the swirling white on the far shore. A light. It was there, then gone, then there again. A campfire. Someone was over there. Hope, sharp and painful, shot through me. I stood up on stiff legs, ignoring the protests of my body, and started waving my arms and screaming, my voice raw against the wind. The light didn't move. It just burned, steady. Then a figure emerged from the trees and walked to the water's edge. Even through the blizzard, I recognized the hulking silhouette. Harlan. He stood there, watching us again. He lifted an arm, not to wave for help, but to raise a thermos to his lips in a slow, deliberate toast. The sight of him, warm and smug across the impassable water, unlocked something feral in me. This wasn't just about surviving the storm anymore. It was about exposing him. I had to make a signal he couldn't ignore. I stumbled to the nearest stand of river birch, my numb hands tearing at the peeling, papery bark. It was perfect tinder. Using the only dry thing left, the pages of my waterproof river guide notebook, I built a tiny pyramid of shreds under the bark in the semi-shelter of the boulder. My lighter. My fingers were so stiff, I dropped it 3 times into the snow before I got a feeble flame to catch. The paper smoked, sputtered, and then the birch bark ignited with a beautiful, hungry snap. The fire was small, but in the white void, the plume of orange smoke was a screaming beacon. I fed it every piece of driftwood I could claw from the snow. Harlan's fire vanished suddenly, as if doused. He'd seen it. He knew what it meant. My triumph was short-lived. Chloe, the hypothermic grad student, had gone terrifyingly quiet and still. One of her friends, a man named David, was checking her pulse. He looked up at me, his face crumbling in the firelight, and shook his head. A hollow, echoing silence filled our huddle, louder than the storm. The cost of my defiance, of Harlan's rage was no longer abstract. It had a name, and it was lying lifeless in the snow beside us. The rescue came an hour later, not because of my fire, but because a park ranger on the far ridge had noted the unnatural debris jam on his patrol and saw the smoke. The trial was a media circus. Harlan was convicted on multiple counts, including involuntary manslaughter for Chloe's death. I testified, my voice shaking, not from cold this time, but from a grief that felt permanent. I never guided on the river again. I moved west, to a desert state where the cold is dry and predictable. But sometimes, when I smell damp wool or hear the wind howl in a certain way, I'm back on that island. The cold I feel then isn't in the air. It's the memory of watching a man drink his coffee while we fought to live, and the chilling understanding that the most dangerous thing on the river that day wasn't the water or the storm, but the calculated cruelty of another person. Story 3. My truck slid sideways on the ice, and I knew immediately they'd slashed more than just one tire. All 4 were flat, and I was stuck in a valley so remote that my GPS couldn't even load the map. The temperature was dropping to single digits, my phone had no signal, and I could still hear their dogs baying somewhere in the forest above me. 20 minutes ago, I'd made the mistake of photographing their illegal kill site. Now they'd sabotaged my vehicle and left me to freeze to death in the West Virginia wilderness, because dead women don't testify. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 6 hours to when I thought I was just doing my job as a licensed wildlife control hunter and tell you how documenting poachers almost became the last thing I ever did. My name's Rebecca Torres. I'm 27, and I've been hunting since I was 12 years old when my dad took me out for my first deer season. By the time I was 23, I was good enough to get accepted into West Virginia's Deer Management Assistance Program. Basically, the state pays you to hunt on public land to control overpopulation and collect data on herd health. It's January 2024, prime season, and I'd been assigned to a section of Monongahela National Forest that had reported higher than normal deer populations. The area was remote, accessible only by Forest Service roads that were barely maintained in winter, which is exactly why deer thrived there. Less human pressure. That morning, January 18th, I loaded my truck before dawn. Rifle, tree stand equipment, field dressing kit, GPS tracker, and my data collection forms for the state. The forecast called for temperatures in the teens and possible snow, but I'd hunted in worse. I drove 2 hours into the forest, parked at a trailhead, and hiked another mile to my designated hunting zone. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe. I'd been in my tree stand maybe 40 minutes, the sun just starting to burn off the morning frost, when I heard the dogs. Not the distant baying of someone's hounds chasing a rabbit. These were close, aggressive, multiple animals working together. Bloodhounds, from the sound of it. My first thought was that maybe another hunter had dogs, except using dogs to hunt deer has been illegal in West Virginia since 1993. The baying got louder, and then I heard men shouting, directing the pack. I stayed still in my stand, watching through my scope, and that's when I saw them. A massive buck crashing through the underbrush, exhausted, tongue hanging out, with at least 5 dogs on its trail. Right behind them came 4 men on ATVs, rifles across their laps, pushing the deer toward what I realized was a killing zone. They'd set this up like a drive hunt, using the dogs to exhaust the animal until it couldn't run anymore. It's not just illegal, it's cruel. The deer have no chance when they're run to.
Exhaustion by a pack. I watched the buck stumble and fall about 200 yards from my position. The dogs reached it first, and what happened next made me sick. They didn't wait for the men. They started tearing into the deer while it was still alive. The men pulled up on their ATVs, laughing, letting the dogs work for a few seconds before one of them finally shot the buck to finish it. Then they called off the dogs, and I could see them field dressing the animal right there, working fast like they'd done this 100 times. I pulled out my phone to take photos. My hands were shaking, but I got clear shots of their faces, their ATVs, the dogs, the dead deer. As a program participant, I was legally obligated to report any wildlife violations I witnessed, but I also knew I needed solid evidence because these guys clearly weren't amateurs. They had expensive equipment, trained dogs, and they were operating in one of the most remote sections of the forest, like they owned it. I stayed in my tree stand for another 20 minutes, watching them load the deer onto one of the ATVs. They were talking loud enough that I caught fragments, something about 15 this week and buyer in Elkins. They weren't just poaching for personal use, they were running a commercial operation, killing deer out of season and selling the meat. I took photos of everything, including the license plate on one ATV that was actually registered. Most poachers are smart enough to remove plates, but these guys were confident, cocky. When they finally drove off, heading deeper into the forest on an old logging road, I climbed down from my stand. My plan was to hike back to my truck, drive to the nearest ranger station, and report everything with my photos. Simple, legal, safe. Except when I got to where they'd killed the buck, I found something that changed everything. There were at least a dozen gut piles in the area, some frozen solid from previous days, some still fresh. They'd been hunting this spot repeatedly, killing multiple deer, and leaving the evidence scattered like they didn't care who found it. I was photographing the gut piles when I heard an ATV engine coming back. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran for the tree line, but I wasn't fast enough. One of them saw me. He stopped his ATV and just stared for a second, and I could see the moment he recognized what I was doing. I had my phone in my hand, pointed at the evidence. He shouted something and gunned his engine, coming straight at me. I crashed through the forest, running downhill toward where I'd left my truck, branches whipping my face, my rifle banging against my back. Behind me, I could hear him on the ATV, crashing through the underbrush, and then I heard him on his radio. "We got someone up here taking pictures. Woman, heading toward the trailhead." My blood went cold. They had radios. They were coordinated, and now they knew I'd seen everything. I burst out onto the trail and sprinted the last quarter mile to my truck, fumbling for my keys, my lungs burning from the cold air and panic. I got my truck started and threw it in reverse, spinning out on the icy Forest Service road as I tried to turn around. In my rearview mirror, I could see two ATVs emerging from the trail, and behind them, a pickup truck I hadn't seen before. They were cutting me off from the main road. I had two choices: try to ram past them or take the southern logging road that looped around through the valley. I chose the valley. Stupid decision in hindsight, but I was panicking. The logging road was barely a road at all, just two ruts through the snow, and my truck fishtailed constantly as I pushed it faster than I should have. Behind me, the pickup was gaining, and the ATVs had split off, probably trying to flank me on parallel trails. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but I had no signal. These valleys are dead zones, blocked by mountains on all sides. I was completely cut off from help, alone with men who had just watched me document their illegal operation and who clearly weren't going to let me leave with that evidence. The chase went on for maybe 10 minutes, my truck sliding around corners, branches scraping the sides, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Then I felt the truck pull hard to the right. Something was wrong with the steering. I slowed down and realized one of my tires was going flat. Not a blowout, not a puncture from a rock. It was deflating slowly, steadily, like it had been cut. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the pickup had fallen back, no longer chasing. They didn't need to chase anymore. They knew what was coming. I made it maybe another mile before 2 more tires went. And then I understood. They'd done something to my truck back at the trailhead while I was running through the forest. Probably slashed all 4 tires partially so they'd fail once I started driving. The truck shuddered to a stop in the middle of the valley road, listing sideways on 4 flat tires, completely immobilized. I was trapped. I grabbed my rifle and my pack and got out of the truck, looking around frantically. The valley was maybe a mile wide, steep ridges on both sides, and the temperature was already dropping as the sun started to sink behind the western ridge. I could hear engines in the distance. They were coming, but slowly now, taking their time because they knew I had nowhere to go. I started hiking uphill toward the eastern ridge, thinking maybe I could get high enough to get a cell signal or at least find a defensible position. The snow was knee-deep in places, and I was sweating despite the cold, my legs burning as I climbed. Behind me, I heard the pickup truck stop near my disabled vehicle, heard doors slam, heard voices. Then I heard the dogs again. They were bringing the bloodhounds. They were going to hunt me the same way they'd hunted those deer, and that realization made something primal kick in. I wasn't prey. I was a hunter too, and I knew these forests. I kept climbing. I made it maybe halfway up the ridge when I heard the dogs getting closer, their baying echoing off the valley walls. I found an outcropping of rocks and took cover behind it, catching my breath, trying to think. My phone still had no signal. My rifle had 5 rounds. I was a good shot, but I wasn't going to start a gunfight with 4 men unless I had absolutely no choice. That would make me the criminal, not them. I needed to survive until dark, then move under cover of night, try to reach the main road or another trailhead. But it was only 3 p.m. Sunset wasn't until after 6. 3 hours might as well have been 3 days. The dogs reached my position first, 3 bloodhounds that circled the rocks, baying and scratching. Then the men arrived, 2 on foot, following the dogs, both carrying rifles. One of them was the guy who'd spotted me at the gut pile site. He looked up at my position and smiled. "You should have minded your own business," he called out. "Now you're gonna freeze up there, or you're gonna come down and delete those photos. Your choice." I didn't answer, just kept my rifle ready and watched them. They didn't come closer. They didn't need to. They called the dogs back, conferred briefly. Then one of them spoke into his radio. A few minutes later, the other 2 men showed up, one carrying bolt cutters and what looked like my spare tire from my truck bed. They were making sure I couldn't fix the vehicle, even if I got back to it. Then they did something I didn't expect. They left. Just turned around and walked back down the ridge, loaded up their ATVs and the pickup, and drove away. I stayed hidden for another 20 minutes, confused and terrified, before I understood their strategy. They didn't need to hunt me down or hurt me directly. All they had to do was strand me in sub-freezing temperatures without transportation or communication, and nature would do the rest. If I died of exposure, it would look like a hunting accident. Inexperienced woman got lost, truck broke down, she tried to hike out, and froze to death. Clean.
no evidence of foul play. And my phone, with all the photos, would be on my frozen body, easy to retrieve and destroy. The temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared behind the ridge. I was dressed for sitting in a tree stand, not for hiking through snow or spending a night outside. I had matches, a small emergency kit in my pack, but no tent, no sleeping bag, no real survival gear. I needed to move, needed to stay warm, but I also needed to be smart. I started hiking along the ridgeline, parallel to the valley, looking for any sign of civilization. A cabin, a road, anything. My hands were going numb despite my gloves, and I could feel the cold seeping through my boots. I'd been walking for maybe an hour, the light fading fast, when I saw it. A fire tower. Old, probably abandoned, but it was structure. It was shelter, and most importantly, it was high ground.
If I could get up there, I might get cell signal. I pushed toward it through the darkening forest, my legs shaking from exhaustion and cold, my breath coming in frozen clouds. The tower was maybe 60 feet tall, metal framework with a small enclosed cabin at the top, and the ladder was coated in ice. I almost cried with relief when I found the bottom hatch wasn't locked, just rusted shut. I forced it open and started climbing, my hands so cold I could barely grip the rungs. At the top, I broke the window of the cabin. It was already cracked anyway, and climbed inside. It was marginally warmer than outside, protected from the wind at least. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. 1 bar of signal. 1 bar. I dialed 911 and the call connected, but the signal was so weak I could barely hear the dispatcher. I shouted my situation: stranded hunter, truck sabotaged, poachers, Monongahela National Forest, valley near Cranberry Wilderness, and gave them my GPS coordinates before the call dropped. I tried calling back 3 times, but couldn't get through. I had no idea if they'd gotten enough information to send help, or if my broken transmission just sounded like a prank call. I spent the worst night of my life in that fire tower. I did everything I could to stay warm. Jumping jacks, wrapping myself in the emergency blanket from my pack, even burning pages from an old logbook I found to create tiny amounts of heat. The temperature dropped to 8 degrees. I could see my breath in the moonlight, ice forming on the inside of the windows. Every hour, I tried my phone again, but the signal came and went randomly. Around 3 a.m., I saw headlights in the valley below. A vehicle driving slowly on the logging road, spotlights sweeping the trees. They'd come back to check if I was dead yet. I stayed completely dark and silent in the tower, watching them search for maybe 20 minutes before they left again. Dawn came eventually, gray and cold, and I was still alive, but hypothermic, my movements slow and clumsy. I tried my phone one more time and miraculously got through to 911 again. This time, I stayed on long enough for them to confirm they dispatched Forest Service and state police to my location. The rescue team found me around 10 a.m. 2 Forest Service rangers and a state trooper who'd been searching since first light. I was barely coherent, my core temperature at 93 degrees, but I was alive. They got me down from the tower, wrapped me in warming blankets, and drove me to the hospital in Elkins. The photos on my phone had survived, and once I was stable enough to talk, I told them everything. The state police and game wardens raided the poachers' operation that same day. Turns out they had a processing facility in a barn outside Marlinton where they were butchering and packaging illegal venison for sale to restaurants. They arrested all 4 men, plus 2 others involved in the distribution side. The charges were extensive. Illegal hunting, hunting out of season, using dogs to hunt deer, commercial poaching, attempted manslaughter for stranding me, destruction of property. The ringleader got 6 years in federal prison because they'd been operating on federal land. The others got 2 to 4 years each, plus massive fines and lifetime hunting bans. The state estimated they'd killed over 200 deer illegally in the past 3 years, making roughly $500,000 selling the meat. I spent 4 days in the hospital recovering from hypothermia and frostbite, lost 2 toes on my left foot that couldn't be saved. I still hunt, still work with the deer management program, but I'm much more careful now. I always tell someone exactly where I'll be and when I'll be back. I carry a satellite messenger that works without cell signal, and I never, ever hunt alone in remote areas anymore. What haunts me most is how close their plan came to working. If I hadn't found that fire tower, if the 911 call hadn't connected, if the temperature had been 5 degrees colder, I would have died out there, and they would have gotten away with it. My frozen body would have been found in spring. My truck would have looked like mechanical failure, and those men would still be out there poaching. Instead, they're in prison, and West Virginia shut down 3 other similar operations based on leads from the investigation. I testified at their trial with 2 missing toes and photos that put them away. They tried to silence me by leaving me to freeze, but I'm still here, still hunting, still speaking. And every time I see a deer in my scope now, I think about that buck they ran to exhaustion with their dogs, and I make sure my shot is clean and legal and respectful, because that's the difference between a hunter and a poacher. One honors the animal, the other just takes and destroys. I'll always be a hunter. They will always be criminals.